Hey everyone, Cody Hayes here, and I'd like to welcome you to part four as we look at the Gospel of John. And we left off with the story of the woman caught in adultery. And I mentioned how, that story is not part of the earliest manuscript that we have of the Gospel of John, but what might have potentially been the copyist slash author's intent behind it. Well, there's something else I would add to this, and that is um, I referenced the passage from Deuteronomy where I felt arguably is the best example of the story. But why was the woman, subjected to being stoned anyway? And one of the reasons I can think of is how an individual is considered to be a Jew. And one of the ways that a person is considered to be a Jew is through birth. You're born Jewish through your mother. And ironically, within Judaism, a person can be an atheist and still be considered a Jew. That's not the case with the other two Abrahamic faiths, Christianity, at least certainly traditionally speaking, and Islam. But you can be that way within Judaism. When I took the course of the history of Judaism, which Rabbi Rita taught at Missouri State, Rita Sherwin, this topic came up, and Rabbi Rita admitted that yes, you can be an atheist and be a Jew. And she stated how, the family comes first, and then the religion forms out of the family. So you can reject the religious side while still remaining part of the family. But moving on here a little bit with anti Judaism, you have the triumphant church and the blind synagogue. Well, in John's gospel, rather than you have those specific religious slash political parties, in this case, we would be referring to the Pharisees, but also you could say the scribes too. But Jesus's opponents in John's gospel, they're frequently just called the Jews. Now, in the Gospel of John, Jesus and his early followers, of course, are Jewish, and they are referred to as being Jewish. In the story of Jesus and the Samaritan woman in the Gospel of John, the Samaritan woman says to Jesus, "Why are you asking me for a drink of water? You're a Jew." And, obviously, those that supported Jesus, like Nicodemus the Pharisee, were Jewish, and, that comes up too. But his opponents are often just frequently referred to as the Jews rather than, say, the Pharisees. It's just now the Jews. And why would that be the case? Well, obviously, the Gospel of John is the last one of the canonical Gospels to have been written. It's written within over a generation after the Roman Jewish War. Christianity and Judaism have even further gone their separate ways. The Jewish people would be those saying that Jesus did not fulfill the messianic requirements. So I would say that a lot of it is because of that. But just to add to that, this passage, you are of your father the devil. And I'm going to have me a quick sip of water before commenting on this. In the dialogue of this particular passage, and you can look at it for yourself, um, Jesus is discussing with his opponents, who are referred to as the Jews, and his opponents mention how Abraham is their father. And Jesus states back to them, if Abraham was your father, you would be doing the works of Abraham. You don't. He's not your father. To which their response to that is, we're not illegitimate. God is our father. And Jesus replies back to them, if God was your father, you would know exactly who I am, but you don't. You're trying to kill me. God's not your father. Your father is the devil. And groups that are known for being anti Jewish, such as the Ku Klux Klan, this is often a passage that they reference frequently against Jewish people, often refer to them as devils or state that their father is the devil, that kind of thing. And where they're getting that from this passage in John. Now, again, like I stated earlier, you know, not all Jewish people are in the Gospel of John looked upon in a negative light. But essentially, the ones that are looked upon positively are those that, believe in Jesus, follow Jesus, but then those who do not are treated in a negative light. So, moving forward here with the Passion narrative, we have there an image of Jesus before Annas, the former high priest, scourging at the pillar, and then Jesus again before Pilate. Well, after Jesus' arrest by Jewish authorities, he's taken before Annas, the former high priest, and this was witnessed by a disciple. And then he's later taken before Caiaphas, the current high priest. John's account doesn't feature Jesus appearing before the Sanhedrin. So, John's account, unlike the synoptics, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, Jesus does not appear before the Jewish court, the Sanhedrin. But he does appear before Annas, the former high priest, and now his son in law, Caiaphas, the current high priest. But the one thing that stands out to me here is how Jesus being taken before Annas was witnessed by a disciple, essentially viewed as the beloved disciple. And this is one of the reasons why I do have questions about John being the beloved disciple. I have a hard time believing that Annas would have allowed essentially this kid into his court for a pretty important hearing. To try and think of that another way, let's say that the President of the United States called for an impromptu cabinet meeting, just something out of nowhere, called to an impromptu cabinet meeting. And as representatives are coming forth, the president happens to see within the White House or wherever this meeting would be held a young White House staffer or a young White House intern. The president knows both of these individuals quite well because he, or one day probably she, encounters them, throughout the halls of the White House and tells the young staffer or intern, yeah, come on in too. Now, could the president do that? In theory, yes. But is that likely? Realistically speaking, no. And that's kind of an issue I have with John being the beloved disciple, being present before Annas, that even if Annas did know him somehow, it's just hard to believe he would allow him to come into such an important meeting. So that gives me questions: was the beloved disciple somebody else? But there's also some other possibilities, I think, too, and that is maybe a copyist put the beloved disciple John as a witness to this, because Even though Jesus in the Synoptics, he's taken before the Sanhedrin, there's no eyewitness to what exactly went on. Pretty much what went on would be, oral tradition, which was later put into written form. And maybe a copyist realized that we need to have that somebody needed to have been present and just put somebody present there to validate what went on rather than just going by what was said orally to have taken place. But moving forward, in Pilate's first encounter with Jesus, he has him flogged, but in his second encounter, he asks where he comes from and informs him of the power that he has over him. So, in the first encounter that Pilate has with Jesus, he has him flogged, what's known as the scourging of the pillar, scourging at the pillar. But then in his second encounter, and this comes from the Jewish authorities mentioning how Jesus declared himself to be the Son of God. And so Pilate then approaches him again and asks him, where do you come from? And Jesus doesn't respond back to him on that question. But a part of me wonders, with this particular gospel and factoring in who Pilate was, that, Jesus was, referring to himself as the Son of God. Pilate, who of course would have been brought up in, Greco-Roman Gentilism, commonly referred to as paganism, where it was common that the major gods, such as Zeus or in his Roman form Jupiter, would occasionally, leave Mount Olympus or wherever and have sexual relations with, human women, and you would have these, half human, half god individuals that maybe Pilate was thinking something along those lines, asking, where do you come from? Jesus doesn't respond back to him. But then he informs him of the power that he has over him, that don't you know I have the power to release you or have you crucified? To, of course, Jesus responds back, you would have no power over me if it had not been given to you from above. But in the prisoner exchange between Jesus and Barabbas, Jesus is condemned to die, and the chief priests within Judaism inform Pilate that they have no other king but the Roman emperor. This comes from a line that Pilate makes the statement of, shall I crucify your king? And the chief priest within Judaism essentially states, we have no king but Caesar, or no king but the emperor, the Roman emperor. And certainly that statement would have even further divided um, Jesus from, in this case, his Jewish opponents. Well, got one more portion, I believe, of the Gospel of John to look at. So we will get to that next, but take care. I will symbolically see you then.